was a grand house filled with riches, gold, and pride, yet inside its walls lived a girl who felt poorer than anyone alive. She was the daughter of a wealthy man, but instead of love, she was given scorn. Her father could never see past her size. He called her lazy, useless, and an embarrassment to his name. From the time she was young, she had heard the whispers. She eats too much. She is not beautiful. No man will ever want her. Every word carved deep into her heart, leaving scars no one could see. Her mother was long gone, and the only voice that mattered in her life was her father's. But that voice never spoke kindness. The girl longed for affection, for someone to tell her she was worthy of love, but all she received was mockery. Each meal became a reminder of her shame. Each gathering with the townsfolk, a spectacle where her father compared her to other daughters of wealth, slim, elegant, and graceful. And each night she cried quietly, wondering why she had been cursed to be born in the wrong body to the wrong father. But the cruelty reached its peak one fateful day. Her father, burning with anger at her defiance over a minor household matter, decided to teach her what he called a lesson. He did not punish her with silence or isolation. No, his cruelty had no limits. In front of the household, the servants, and the gossiping neighbors, he declared, "From this day forward, you are no longer a daughter of this house. You will live with the slaves. You will eat what they eat, sleep where they sleep, and you will serve as they serve. Perhaps then you will learn humility." The girl's face burned with shame. Her heart pounded and her eyes filled with tears she refused to let fall in front of him. Around her, whispers turned into mocking laughter. To her father, it was justice. To her, it was humiliation beyond measure. And so she was sent away, cast into the quarters where the slaves lived. Dusty floors, broken wooden walls, and the smell of labor hung heavy in the air. For a girl raised in silk and jewelry, it was the ultimate disgrace. She believed her father had finally destroyed what little was left of her dignity. But in that very place of shame, something unexpected began to take root. There, among the people her father considered less than human, she met a man. A slave, silent, strong, and with eyes that carried a strange kindness. He did not laugh at her. He did not look at her with disgust. Instead, when he saw her struggling with her tears, he simply whispered, "You don't belong in his cruelty. Here you will find respect." What began as punishment was about to transform into a love no one could ever imagine. The night she was cast into the slave quarters, the wealthy man's daughter sat alone on a rough wooden bench, her silk dress torn and her jewels stripped away. For the first time in her life, she was surrounded not by luxury but by silence, heavy, suffocating silence. Only the sound of chains rattling from the workers who had just returned from the fields filled the air. Her heart pounded as she realized she was no longer her father's daughter. She was no one. The servants who had once bowed at her presence now looked at her with pity, or worse, with curiosity. Some whispered among themselves, "How could he do this to his own blood?" Others smirked, secretly enjoying the sight of the proud daughter of the house brought down so low. Her cheeks burned with shame. She wanted to run, to hide, but where could she go? Her father's words echoed in her mind. "You will live as a slave and nothing more." It felt like a curse branded on her very soul. When the night grew colder, she wrapped her arms around herself, shivering. The food given to her was a small piece of bread and a bowl of thin soup, barely enough to fill a child's stomach. For a girl who had always eaten feasts prepared by the finest cooks, it was unbearable. Yet hunger gnawed at her, forcing her to take small, hesitant bites. Each swallow tasted like humiliation. Her tears finally fell as she remembered the grand dining table of her father's house. Golden plates, roasted meats, and sweet fruits. But all that wealth had never fed her heart. And now, sitting with an empty stomach and a heavier heart, she realized how hollow her life had been. Among the slaves, one figure quietly observed her. He was not like the others. There was a calmness in his eyes, a dignity in the way he carried himself despite the chains that bound his wrists. His name was whispered only rarely, for to the master he was just property, but to his fellow workers, he was a source of quiet strength. That night, when the other slaves lay down to rest after their long day of labor, the man walked closer to her. He could see the redness in her eyes, the trembling of her hands. She looked at him with fear, expecting ridicule or cruelty, but instead his voice was low and gentle. "You don't belong to their hatred," he said. I know what it is to be treated as nothing. But you are not nothing. Don't let his words break you. She blinked at him in disbelief. For years she had lived surrounded by wealth, yet never once had she heard words so kind. Not from her father, not from anyone. Her lips quivered, but she could not speak. The man did not press her for answers. He simply placed half of his own bread beside her and stepped back, returning to his corner. She stared at the bread, stunned. A slave, who himself had so little, had chosen to share what he had with her. That night, as she lay on the cold floor, the daughter could not stop thinking about him. Shame still burned within her, and the weight of humiliation still crushed her spirit. But for the first time since her punishment began, she felt a flicker of something new. It was not joy. It was not hope. It was something simpler, something she had never experienced before, respect. And though her father had meant to break her spirit by sending her to the lowest place, fate had quietly placed in her path someone who would lift her higher than she had ever been. But she did not know yet how deeply this man's presence would change her life. She did not know that the punishment meant to destroy her would soon become the greatest blessing she had ever received. The morning sun crept through the cracks of the wooden walls, casting pale streaks of light across the slave quarters. The daughter awoke with stiff limbs and aching pride. Her body longed for the softness of her silken bed, but her heart reminded her that such comforts no longer belonged to her. She was no longer the master's daughter. She was, in the eyes of everyone around her, just another outcast. As the slaves began their day, she sat apart, clutching the torn fabric of her dress. Every sound, the clatter of buckets, the crack of the overseer's whip, felt foreign to her ears. She had lived in the same house all her life, yet this world had always been invisible to her. Now it was the only world she knew. Her father's words still echoed cruelly in her mind. Live like a slave. That is all you are worth. The shame of it burned more fiercely than the hunger in her stomach. But then, something unexpected happened. The same man who had offered her half of his bread the night before approached again. His steps were steady, his presence calm. In his hands he carried a wooden bucket filled with water. Without a word he set it before her. She looked at him, suspicious and embarrassed. Why are you helping me?" she asked softly, her voice breaking. He held her gaze, and for a moment she saw no pity there, only quiet strength. "Because I know what it feels like to be treated as less. But I also know you are not less." His words pierced through the wall she had built around herself. For so long she had believed what her father said, that her worth was measured by her size, by her appearance, by how much she disappointed him. Yet here was a man with nothing to give but his honesty, and in his eyes, she saw something she had never seen before: respect. He showed her how to draw water from the well, his large hands guiding hers as she tried for the first time. She was clumsy, spilling half of it on the ground, and her cheeks burned with embarrassment. She expected him to laugh, but he didn't. Instead, he smiled gently and said, "No one is born knowing everything. You'll learn." Those words, so simple, so ordinary, felt like a balm to her wounded heart. As the days passed, he continued to show her small kindnesses. When the others mocked her for her soft hands that blistered quickly, he quietly wrapped her palms with cloth to protect them. When she struggled to carry heavy loads, he shared the weight without being asked. And when the overseer barked orders at her, ready to humiliate her further, the slave would step forward to shield her, taking blame that was not his. Each act of kindness was like a light breaking through the dark fog of her despair. She began to notice the lines of exhaustion on his face, the scars across his back, marks of years of suffering. Yet even with all his burdens, he carried himself with dignity, never letting cruelty strip him of his humanity. One evening, as they sat near the dying embers of a fire, she finally found the courage to speak. "Why don't you hate me?" she whispered. "I am the daughter of the man who owns you, the man who has given you nothing but pain." He looked at her with calm eyes, the firelight reflecting in them like molten gold. "Because hate is his way, not mine. If I carry his hate in my heart, then he wins twice. I would rather carry kindness, because kindness cannot be taken away." Her breath caught in her throat. No one had ever spoken such words to her. That night, as she lay awake on the hard floor, she realized something had shifted inside her. The humiliation that had once crushed her spirit now felt a little lighter. And the man her father had thought unworthy was becoming the only person who made her feel truly alive. For a short while, the daughter began to find some fragile peace among the slave quarters. Each day still carried hardship, yet it no longer felt like pure torment. The slave's kindness had become her shelter, his presence a quiet reassurance that she was more than her father's cruel words. But the world outside was not blind. The whispers had started. When townsfolk passed the estate, they saw the once wealthy daughter carrying buckets, her dress stained, her hair undone. For some it was a scandal worth mocking. For others it was entertainment. Gossip spread like wildfire. The master has punished his own child, thrown her to the slaves. Imagine the shame, living among them. And worse still, she seems content in their company. Every word cut deeper into her pride. Wherever she walked, she felt eyes following, mocking, judging. The punishment that was meant to humiliate her had now become the subject of the entire village's amusement. And then came her father's wrath. One evening, as she quietly helped the slave mend a broken fence, her father arrived on horseback. His face was twisted with rage as he saw her smiling faintly at something the man had said. "Is this what you've become?" he thundered, laughing with slaves, finding joy in their filth. "You shame me beyond words." She froze, her breath caught in her throat. Every fiber of her being trembled under his voice, the same voice that had belittled her all her life. The slave stepped slightly forward, as if to protect her, but the father's glare burned into him. "Stay in your place, dog," he spat. "Do not dare raise your head to me." Her heart ached. Here was a man who had never defended her, never cherished her. And beside her stood another who had given her respect without expecting anything in return. The contrast was unbearable, but the father's words cut deeper than ever before. "You belong with them," he hissed, his voice dripping with disgust. "No man of worth would ever want you. This is your fate, your punishment, and you seem to be enjoying it. How disgraceful." That night, alone in the corner of the quarters, she wept silently. His words clawed at her heart. She remembered the cruel laughter of the villagers, the way even the slaves sometimes looked at her with curiosity. Was her father right? Was she truly only fit to live here? Was she fooling herself by believing she had found dignity? The slave found her in tears but said nothing at first. He simply sat near, his silence offering more comfort than 1,000 words. Finally, she whispered, broken and trembling, "Maybe he is right. Maybe I do belong here. Maybe I am nothing more." He shook his head slowly. His voice was steady, resolute. "No one's worth is decided by another man's cruelty. Not by your father, not by the villagers, not even by me. You must decide for yourself who you are, and you are more than their judgment." But even as his words warmed her heart, the seeds of doubt remained. Her father's cruelty still weighed heavily, dragging her spirit into conflict. For the first time she was torn between two worlds, the world of her father's hatred, and the world of this slave's unexpected love. And in that fragile space between shame and hope, she faced a terrifying question. Which voice would she choose to believe? The storm came without warning. Dark clouds swallowed the sky, and thunder shook the earth like the roar of an angry beast. Rain poured down in heavy sheets, turning the fields into rivers of mud. The slaves scrambled to pull animals into shelter, while the overseers barked orders, their whips cracking louder than the thunder. The daughter, still adjusting to her new life, tried to help. Her hands, once soft and delicate, fumbled as she struggled to carry feed to the frightened horses. The wind howled around her, nearly knocking her off her feet. For a moment, fear paralyzed her, and then she heard it. Wood splintering, the barn roof groaning under the weight of the storm. Before she could move, a heavy beam cracked loose, crashing downward. She froze, unable to scream, her body locked in terror, but someone else moved. The slave. He lunged forward, shoving her out of the way just as the beam collapsed. The wood slammed across his back, knocking him to his knees. Pain twisted his face, but still he pushed against the weight, forcing himself to stand so she could crawl free. "Go," he shouted through clenched teeth. "Get to safety." Her heart pounded, panic flooding through her. "No, I can't leave you." But he would not listen. With a final burst of strength, he shifted the beam enough for her to escape. Only when she was safe did he let himself collapse to the ground, breath ragged, body trembling. Rain poured over both of them as she rushed back to his side. She pressed her hands to the bleeding wound on his shoulder, her tears mixing with the storm. "Why?" she sobbed. "Why would you do this for me?" His voice was weak but steady. Because your life is worth more than mine, and because no one should ever feel unloved. Those words shattered the last of the walls around her heart. For the first time in her life, she felt what it was to be valued, not for her looks, not for her status, but simply for who she was. Others soon rushed forward, dragging the heavy beam away and pulling the slave to safety. The overseer shouted in frustration, angry that a lowly worker had risked everything for the master's daughter. Yet none could deny the truth. He had saved her life. When her father heard of the event, his rage was unlike anything she had seen. Instead of gratitude, he sneered. "Do you see now?" he spat. "You owe your life to a slave. That is what you have become, one of them." But this time his words did not pierce her as deeply, for in her heart she knew the truth. The man her father despised had shown her more courage, more sacrifice, and more love than her father ever had. That night, as the storm finally quieted and the house stood in uneasy silence, she sat by the slave's side, tending to his wounds. He winced but never complained, his calm eyes still carrying that quiet strength she had come to know. "Rest," she whispered softly. "You saved me, and I will never forget it." In that moment she made a silent vow. Whatever the world said, whatever her father believed, she would no longer see herself as a burden, nor this man as a slave. Because in her eyes, he was the only person who had ever loved her enough to risk everything. And for the first time, she felt a new strength rising within her. The storm had passed, but it had changed everything. The storm had passed, but its memory lingered in every broken branch, every flooded path, and every weary soul on the estate. For the daughter, however, the storm had done more than damage the land. It had shattered her illusions and opened her heart to a truth she could no longer ignore. Inside the dimly lit quarters, she sat by the slave's side. His shoulder was bound with rough cloth, the wound deep but slowly healing. Every so often he winced as the pain surged, but he never uttered a complaint. Instead, he tried to smile, as though comforting her mattered more than his own suffering. "You shouldn't be here," he whispered weakly. "The master would be furious if he saw you tending to me." She dipped the cloth in cool water, pressing it gently to his brow. "Let him be furious," she replied firmly. "You saved my life. The least I can do is save yours." For a moment, silence filled the room, thick, tender, and heavy with unspoken emotions. She had spent her entire life longing for affection, for recognition, for someone to see beyond her body and her father's cruel words. And here he was, a man the world called a slave, treating her as though she mattered more than anything. Her eyes softened as she studied him. His hands were calloused from years of labor, his body scarred by the whip of cruelty. Yet his soul was gentle, strong, and unbroken. "Why are you like this?" she asked quietly. "How can someone who has suffered so much still be kind?" He turned his head, his gaze meeting hers. "Because I know what it feels like to be treated as less than human. And I promised myself I would never let anyone else feel that way, not if I could help it." Her throat tightened, tears brimming in her eyes. All her life her father had made her feel like less beautiful, less worthy, less loved. Yet here was a man with nothing, offering her the one thing she had always craved: dignity. As the days passed, she continued to care for him. She brought him food, cleaned his wounds, and even read aloud from the old book she once kept hidden in her room. Laughter, something she had nearly forgotten, slowly returned to her lips. For the first time, she did not feel judged for how she looked or how much space she took in the world. Instead, she felt accepted. The other slaves noticed too. Whispers spread through the quarters, not of mockery but of wonder. The master's daughter was among them, not as a ruler but as one of their own. And slowly, they welcomed her. Women showed her how to mend torn clothes. Children clung to her skirts, their innocent eyes free of cruelty. For the first time in her life, she belonged. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the sky in shades of gold and crimson, she sat beside him again. His strength was returning, the fire in his eyes brighter than before. "You don't see it yet, do you?" he said softly. "See what?" she asked. "That you are not what your father calls you. You are not weak. You are not shameful. You are more than enough, just as you are." The words struck deep, unraveling years of pain. She looked away, tears spilling freely now, not from sadness, but from the release of chains she had carried too long. For the first time, She saw herself not through her father's cruel eyes, but through the gaze of someone who truly valued her. And in that moment she realized something life-changing. She was worthy of love. Not tomorrow, not when she became thinner or more acceptable, but now. Exactly as she was, the wound on his shoulder was healing, but so too was the wound inside her heart. And with every passing day, the bond between them grew stronger, unspoken yet undeniable. She was no longer the girl defined by shame. She was becoming a woman who knew her worth, and standing beside her, the man the world had called a slave had become her savior, not just of her life, but of her soul. The silence before the storm was heavier than thunder itself. Word had spread across the estate that the master's daughter no longer kept to the manor, but spent her days among the slaves. Whispers became rumors, and rumors became an outrage that finally reached her father's ears. He stormed into the slave quarters one evening, his boots striking the earth with the fury of a man who believed his authority had been challenged. His eyes blazed with fire as he saw his daughter sitting beside the very man he despised most. "What disgrace is this?" he roared, his voice echoing off the wooden walls. "You, my daughter, the shame of my house, daring to lower yourself further by tending to a slave." The daughter flinched at his words, for they carried the same sting they always had. But this time something inside her did not shatter. Instead, it burned with defiance. She stood, her body trembling but her voice steady. "I am not the shame of this house," she declared. "The shame is a father who cannot love his own child. The shame is a man so blinded by pride that he cannot see the worth of another human being." Gasps filled the room. No one had ever dared speak to the master this way. His face turned red, his hand rising as if to strike her, but before he could, the slave stepped forward. "Enough," the man said firmly, placing himself between father and daughter. His back was still healing, but his stance was unbroken, unafraid. "You may own my labor, but you will never own my spirit. And you will not harm her again." The father's rage boiled over. "You dare defy me? You are nothing." But the daughter stepped closer, her hand gently resting on the slave's arm. Her voice, though softer, carried more strength than any shout. "He is not nothing," she said. "He is the only one who has ever loved me without condition. He saved me when you would have let me die. He gave me dignity when you stripped it away. If you cannot see that, then it is not him who is nothing, it is you." The words hung in the air like a blade. The father's chest heaved, his pride tearing at him, but he found no answer. Around them, the slaves watched in silent awe, their hearts swelling at the courage unfolding before their eyes. For the first time, the daughter did not shrink beneath his glare. She stood tall, unbroken, and unashamed. "From this day forward," she continued, her voice unwavering, "I will not live under your cruelty. I choose love. I choose respect. And I choose him." Her father staggered back as though struck. In that moment, he realized he had lost the one thing he had always tried to control, her obedience. His power over her was gone, forever. He left in silence, his pride too great to admit defeat. But his absence was the greatest victory of all. That night, beneath the stars, the daughter and the slave stood together outside the quarters. The air was cool, fresh after the storm, carrying the scent of freedom. "You've given up everything," he said quietly, his eyes filled with both wonder and fear. "No," she replied, her hand finding his. "I've finally found everything." For the first time, her smile was not forced, not hidden behind tears. It was real, radiant, and free. She was no longer the girl weighed down by shame, nor the daughter chained to her father's cruelty. She was a woman who had found love in the unlikeliest of places, and in that love she discovered her true worth. The man, once called a slave, drew her into his arms, holding her as though she were the most precious thing in the world. And to him she was. Their love was not born of wealth or status, but of sacrifice, dignity, and truth. And as the dawn rose the next morning, painting the sky with light, it carried a new beginning for them both, a life no longer defined by chains but by the freedom of love.